So, welcome everybody. And today is the 8th of February, Sunday at 4 p.m. for the UK Sangha call. So, today, Dhammarato might jump in later just to listen. Um, but other than that, he's not giving a talk. So, Mikey asked me if I wanted to give a talk. So yeah, of course, I'm happy to do that. Happy to connect with the Sangha. And yeah, Timo asked a question about basically about unification of minds and yeah, how that keeps our mind really, in our senses, and that we stop being a crowd inside. So yeah, basically, what I assume you mean by that as well is that you're not going into the future, you're not going really into the past, or any thought that you do have about that is going to be very short, and you're going to be able to catch it and to come back to the present moment very easily. And yeah, like in the suttas, there is a sutta where the Buddha talks about emptiness, sunyata. And in that sutta, he basically describes like all the levels of emptiness. And the first level of emptiness is, and I will probably be quoting this wrong, so I probably won't have the exact wording, but it says basically that when a practitioner of the Dhamma is by himself, so out of the village, then he only has the perception of the wilderness. So this is called emptiness based on wilderness. And so all the disturbance that's going on is is coming from things that affect you in your direct environment. For example, you might still be affected by noise, by cicadas, by maybe some discomfort in the body, mosquitoes, that kind of things. And the Buddha says that when you are in that state, then you are aware that any disturbance that there would be, based on the village and based on people, then that disturbance is not there. So whatever is not there, that you are you that is what you are aware of, that it is not there. And whatever is still there, you are also aware of that. So the way you can see that this is not like an ordinary state of mind, but actually takes a bit of training, is that sometimes we will be thinking about the present moment, and and we can actually stay there, but then it's just because for some reason we are not thinking about the past or the future or the village or other people at that time. So that is kind of in an ordinary way. But when we talk about it in a noble way, then then you are actually really aware of that, that your mind is not tempted at all, by things going on in the village or things going on with people, and that then gives a lot of relief. So so that would be one way of talking about it. And then the next level of emptiness would be emptiness dependent on earth. So that would be, yeah, that you are still, uh, yeah, kind of disturbed, or there's still some disturbance based on the body, for example, based on the elements. So that's why the Buddha, calls earth. So you have earth, you have air, water, and the fire elements. Those would be like the basic body elements. And yeah, so you might still have some tension in the body or things like that, but you would not be there would not be any disturbance caused by the wilderness. So not by the mosquitoes, or not by the sounds, or the cicadas, or things like that. And yeah, especially when you are out in the wilderness, like the place where I stay in the mountains, um, which is like a branch monastery of Wat Suan Mokkh. There you have a lot of cicadas and, well, mosquitoes, not so much. But you can really tell when the mind is like properly unified, that you don't even really notice like the screaming of the cicadas, or the heat, or the mosquitoes, or things like that. But then when your mind is not so unified, then then there will be quite a bit of disturbance. So um, yeah, what actually kind of ties into that, which is what I've been experimenting with lately, is that yeah, how to get your mind really unified is that you can actually start to pay attention to the elements. So this is one of the practices that is actually included in Anapanasati, but so it's not specifically mentioned in the steps or the items, but it's something the Buddha taught to learn to unify your mind in the present moment. Is that we want to make sure that our body becomes a very comfortable place, that we are really glad to be here. So when you think of gladdening of the mind, what does it really mean, gladdening? You can think about it in the sense of being glad to be here. And um, as for the elements, you can kind of think about it in this way. When one of the elements becomes too strong, then that tends to pull you out of the present moment. So yeah, so what you can do when you are practicing is, for example, right now, if if you have tension in the body, then you can use the air element to kind of dissolve that tension. So um, for everybody, who's here right now, I would like for all of you to take a moment and kind of notice in your own body. Just become aware of the body. Maybe you can even go like from the top. You can go slowly down and notice what kind of qualities are present in the body. So maybe you are in an air-conditioned environment. Probably most of you won't be, considering the season. Um, or maybe you're quite cold, so you could relate to that as the heat element. And, with the earth element, we can see that kind of as being any sense of solidity in the body and any sense of tension that you are holding. And then the air element would be any kind of movement. So, for example, you can pay attention right now is that when you are taking a deep, long in breath, where do you feel the air element in your body? So it's not really only like the breath coming in through the nose and then going down. It's also, for example, feeling the chest expand, um, feeling your clothing like rub against your body. That's also kind of part of like the movement, how you can kind of sense that. But if you really start to pay attention, close attention, then you can even start to feel it in areas that are usually not at all related to the breath. For example, try if you can notice how the in breath, what kind of effect it has on your foot. Can you actually feel the in breath in the foot as well as the out breath and the pauses? So the way we learn about these elements is that it's not so much about what is actually going on in the body, but it's more about using qualities that you can be aware of in the body and learning how to play with those in order to to make your body a really nice place to stay. Because when your body is a really nice place to stay, then your mind will not tend to slip off into the future and into the past. And one way I like to do that with the body is that when there is nothing out of the ordinary going on, then I will start with the air element. So right now I would like you all to play around with the following image or idea. Imagine that your lower body from the neck down is like a balloon. And on the in breath, you feel, your lower body, you feel it filling up. So the air inside the balloon is kind of like, also making the skin expand. And try if you can practice, staying with that idea. And then on the out breath, we don't really imagine like the breath energy leaving the body, but we can either just keep being aware of the breath energy in the body, or we can sense it kind of like going out through the skin so that we also become aware of what is going on around our body. So in this way, we can really establish that awareness of the whole body. And that is what the Buddha talks about in the third item of Anapanasati, which is being aware of the whole body. So the way I just described this, with the perception of the balloon, that is something that takes, requires a mind that is quite fresh in its energy and already um, yeah, in a good shape. So you want to do that when your energy is quite fresh, and then while you are doing that, you're really talking about gladdening the mind in terms of whatever is going on in the body, whatever feels nice. But also, of course, you are still watching the mind, um, kind of like from a distance. You're kind of having a panoramic view, seeing whatever comes in. So as you're doing that, you're gladdening the mind, and you learn, to stay with that ID, to stay with that balloon, as it were. And you also want to learn to be really aware of the breaks between the in breath and the out breath, because that's the moment when there's kind of like nothing, um, yeah, where you will usually slip off because there's nothing really to pay attention to. So you can kind of think about the breath in two ways. We have the breath that is the resident who lives in the house and never leaves. And then we have the visiting breath. So right now, as you are breathing in and breathing out, kind of practice being continuously aware of the resident breath. So that's the air elements that's always there. And then on the in breath, kind of imagine that the breath is not necessarily coming from the nose. Instead, it's actually arriving directly into all the cells of the body. So that's another idea you can keep in mind, that the breath that's coming from the outside is directly nourishing and filling up all the cells in the body. And you can kind of have those gladdening thoughts like, oh, it feels so good. And you just keep being aware of that breath energy in the body. Now, if you feel your mind is starting to become a little bit tired while you are doing this, or it just feels like, yeah, it's too much effort in the moment, then we can also just chase the breath energy. So here we can apply the same concept. When we are breathing in, we are aware of all the breath energy, all the air elements that we feel in the body, but we are more paying attention to the breath that's coming in. So the breath energy that's coming from the nose down to the throat and down the neck, to the shoulders, to the chest, and then to the belly. And then when we are at the belly, we are really aware of that break. And as we start the out breath again, we follow it back up. But still, like wherever we feel the breath at any particular point, we are still in a very light way, very unforced way, we are taking in all the breath energy that's in the body. So what I kind of struggled with in the beginning is that I would get kind of tense, trying to stay really aware, what's going on in the body. So you can kind of think about it this way. If you just keep the intention in mind that I am going to be aware of the breath energy in the body, and you just refresh that intention on every in breath and on every out breath, then your body will automatically kind of start to be aware of it. So it's not necessarily like um, yes, like you really have to actively do it. You just have to keep that intention in mind to be aware of the breath energy in the whole body. And then over time, your mind will become more and more sensitive to it. And then when we are chasing the breath and being aware of the breath energy in the body, it's good to reflect from time to time, or as you keep looking, you can ask yourself, what would feel really good right now? So sometimes it feels really good to pay attention to the whole body, like as with the balloon. Um, but sometimes it feels much better to keep your attention on a small spot, like for example at the abdomen or at the nose. So it's not that we are only aware of like one spot. Like it's not like we're trying to concentrate the mind. But how big our awareness is, how large of an area of the body it is, that's going to be very relevant um, for what would feel good in the moment. So, for example, when Timo asked about how do we stop our mind from being a crowd, then we can kind of think about it in this way. If our mind is very restless, then maybe it would feel really good to just take one spot at the abdomen and follow that quite closely as we also take in all the breath energy that's in the whole body. Because that would be quite easy, for the mind to follow. And because it is an easy thing to do, um, yeah, you kind of get all the committee members, you get the whole crowd to be on the same page. So that's what we really try, or what we practice to do, is that in order to stop being a crowd inside, we we have to become sensitive to what all the individuals in the crowd, what they want, what they are rebelling about. So if the crowd feels like, oh, being aware of the whole, or paying attention to the whole body, that's way too much effort, and it starts to become very strained. Maybe you become very tense throughout your body. Um, then the mind will slip off over and over again. So, and maybe they will all like sigh a breath of relief, literally, when you make that attention smaller. But other times, the crowd is kind of in for a party, so to say. So you might be like paying attention at at the belly and taking in the whole body. But yeah, but the crowd inside is saying like, oh, this is boring, like it's very, very little input, to be paying attention to only that. Like I want to take in a lot of input and be really sensitive to the whole body. And wow, that can feel really amazing, just to feel that and breath on the entire body. So that's how we become really sensitive to the breath and to the crowd inside. And sometimes, yeah, the crowd wants really deep, long breathing. But also we have to be really sensitive to that bringing it back to those elements. If you, for example, start to feel like a lot of solidity in the chest because you are really breathing so deeply that your muscles are becoming strained, then yeah, then you want to start to take it a little bit easier and kind of make it like a shallow, more shallow long breathing. So does anybody have any questions, any comments so far?
Yeah, thank you for that, Daniel. Something I was thinking about in regards to the kind of body scanning. I've always
Hmm.
found that whenever I do this kind of body scanning, I end up kind of, realizing just how much like tension and aching and everything there is in my body. And then I find it's like
Hmm.
I wasn't even thinking about that tension before, but now all of a sudden I'm like hyper aware of this tension and it's like, oh, this is uncomfortable. And so, yeah, I guess what would be your kind of thoughts on that kind of thing?
I would say that it kind of depends on how unified your mind is. So in the beginning, when our mind is not yet so unified, um, then it depends on how strong the tension is. So if it's like really strong tension, especially if it's in the face or you're getting like headaches, then what I would actually recommend is to kind of intentionally exclude it from your awareness, not in a sense of trying to push it away. But what I find for myself and what I also hear from other people is that usually we tend to have tension in the face. And then I just, pay attention from everything from the neck down. And so I would say in that sense, it's actually kind of helpful not to pay attention to it. But if it's only a little bit, and of course you want to do this in every situation, is you just, pay attention to really relaxing, around the area that you are feeling it. Um, and another way that you can practice with it is that imagine that the tension is kind of like a rock. Again, using that earth perception, a rock in a river. So when you have like a rock in a river that's like, peeking off above the water line, then you will see that the water is, flowing around it. And what you can do is when you are breathing in, imagine the breath flowing to, yeah, to wherever that sensation is. And then kind of keep that idea in mind of the breath flowing around the earth element, flowing around the rock, like water in a river. And you can kind of keep that idea in mind. And I find that this is very calming. It's rivers are very nice, very peaceful. Ideas or perceptions to keep in mind. And just that idea of having like this flow around the sensation, that really helps with like making it into sort of like an island in your body. So that helps to isolate it from the rest of the body. So then the rest of the body will start to kind of relax around that sensation. And it doesn't necessarily have to come from the nose all the way, to the sensation. You can also kind of um, imagine the breath throughout the entire in-breath, kind of starting at a place near the sensation, and then you're just aware of like the flowing around that sensation, and you can kind of play with it that way. Another thing you can do is that you pay attention to the space element, which basically you can think of it this way: is that our body is full mostly of space. Atoms have a lot of room between them. So imagine that it's just the atoms there, and then that the breath is flowing through those atoms. Because usually when we have like a tense sensation, then we kind of tend to see it as like as a really solid, really full sensation. And then by playing around with the way we see it, that can really help break up that tension. And then what I also found really helpful, how Dhammarato talks about it, is that when our attitude is really strong, then we can kind of see that we are, feeling a victim about it. And then we can just say, I'm the boss here. I'm the boss over my own feelings. And because oftentimes, we turn these sensations into like this big, big monster. And even though it's just like a little bit, and we turn it really into a problem, even though it doesn't really have to be. So, also something to keep in mind is that, turning it into a problem like, oh, I can't have tension in the body because then my mind, won't settle down. And that's going to keep me from getting piti or sukha or whatever like that. Like we tend to have like a lot of those kind of thoughts. Um, so yeah, so it's really important, to be really on guard for that as well, because that's gonna make it only more solid, in your minds. So yeah, that's kind of what I would suggest to play around with. I know Dhammarato has also mentioned um, kind of breathing into the sensation. That's also something that you can experiment with. Mm, yeah, so that's pretty much it. Does
Okay,
that
thanks
answer
very much,
your
Daniel.
question? Great.
Yeah, I think the visualizations, that's something I'll have to try out, and then definitely what you said about kind of, I guess, making a mountain out of a molehill with these with these tensions and things. I think it's easy to I scan my body and then it's like, oh, I should be feeling nothing but complete calm and bliss right now, and now I've just set up this problem where it's like, well, I'm not feeling that. And then it's like, oh, I cannot be calm now. Now it's a problem. But really, it's just, yeah, it's not a huge thing. It's just normal to feel some, aches and pains, and we're human beings. And no, thank you, Daniel.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, and I would also mention that, as your mind settles down, even though there might still be some tension in the body, yeah, the mind settling down also has a big impact on the body. So you don't have to be worried that it's like really a big problem, because over time, like your mind will have a big impact on that sensation when you keep practicing. And about the perceptions, um, so so visualization, um, yeah, that can be maybe a bit. What I would rather say is more. It's kind of more like an idea you have in mind. So it's not necessarily something you actively visualize. Maybe more kind of like a flashing image that kind of comes up in your mind, like, oh, this is what I'm doing, or this is what that means. So if we visualize, you can do it a little bit, of course, kind of play around with what feels right. So if you do that, I would say probably keep it quite light, so that we don't really force anything. So does anybody have any more comments? Any more questions? Catherine.
So thank you very much for that. I'm not sure that yet I can really feel the breath in my feet, but feeling it in my chest and my abdomen and the idea of the balloon, I think is very expansive. It's opening, and that helps to lighten the whole feeling rather than having a sort of more tight focus where you're sort of, I don't know, making some effort. It just seems more open and effortless. So thank you.
Great. Yeah, it's really, like a fun way to play with it. And yeah, like I've talked with some people here in the group also who have been kind of playing around with their own ideas, with how they breathe. And yeah, I would say, like, if you use the idea of like breathing like a balloon for a while, and it starts to become a bit like a ritual, or it starts to become a bit tedious, then you can try switching it up. So Younes, who I called with a while back, and he's here in the call now, he mentioned that he had talked with Alex, and the perception that he uses, for example, that I also tried out and found quite interesting, is that when you breathe in, kind of imagine a wave rising up. So like, so you can, when you breathe in, you can try it right now. You take a deep, long in breath, and you can kind of feel your body rising up, your chest rising up, your shoulders rising up. Yeah, uh, your back extending, making yourself tall. And as you're doing that, you can imagine that to be a wave that's rising up. And then when you get to the end of the in-breath, that's when the wave goes down, and your body starts to become small again. So that can be a really, pleasant sensation, pleasant perception to play around with. One other one that I like to use, um, and it's really about like playing around with attention and awareness. So attention would be or awareness would be, yeah, what we are aware of is more in the background, and then attention would be what we're like actively following, actively focusing on. So by playing around with that, and then using these perceptions, you can do a lot of interesting things. for example, when you are chasing the breathing, from the nose to the abdomen and back, one thing I like to do is I imagine like a ball of breath energy going from the nose down to the abdomen and back up. And that ball is kind of like a big ball of breath energy. And wherever you sense that ball, you can kind of feel like the really sensitive to it, the breath or energy around that area. So that's a really can be really pleasant to play around with. And I keep playing with it with different kinds of way of doing it. Like, for example, some other things I've used is imagining like I have a small sun, S-U-N, a small sun, going into the nose and then going down and back up. And then kind of that's illuminating and heating the body like as it comes in, and really making the body very bright and giving that sense of heat that we kind of associate with comfort. And that can be very powerful in my experience. So there are lots and lots of variations, that you can do with this. You can kind of imagine like a glass ball, like a glass sphere going in and coming back up. And yeah, the advantage of doing this is that it trains you to become really interested in what you're doing, to become really entertained with what you're doing. Because sometimes when we are just paying attention to the breath, then it can kind of become a bit plain or a bit tedious. And what I also like to do is, of course, we have a lot of emphasis, on playing around with the practice and playing around with our thinking. Is that what I really notice with myself is that sometimes I really like to pay attention, to the way of breathing. And then I still do the gladdening of the mind, but that's kind of like taking a more of a backseat, as it were, to the breath itself. But then other times I feel like doing that with the breath feels like a lot of energy and doesn't feel so interesting. So then I will, play around a lot more with my thinking. So then I'm paying, really attention to, oh, got nothing to do, nowhere to go, all the good stuff that we've been hearing, on these Sangha calls with Dhammarato. And, having these kind of tool sets, or rather toys, as we could call them, having like a lot of different toys, that's going to really help keep the practice fresh. Because if you just do the same thing, over and over and over again, then yeah, it's gonna get it's gonna become ritualized. Even if you're aware of it, that's kind of starting to become a ritual. It just really helps with keeping it fresh. Um, so even while you are doing this, the things I've described is the way that I like to play with it. So it's kind of like I am at the playground and I tell people like, oh, I like to play hide and seek, and this is how you play hide and seek. And then other people might think like, oh, I really like playing hide and seek too. But then also you can come up with your own games. So in this way, yeah, while you are, while you are playing around with the breathing, you can ask yourself, like, okay, what kind of ID with the breathing would feel really good right now? Like, what kind of perception to keep in mind? So this creativity really helps train your own wisdom, because then it doesn't come from other people, but it comes really genuinely from your own insight. And if you always try what other people tell you to do, that can be really good, but it can really be really good to stimulate your own creativity as well. So yeah, that's what I would recommend for that. Does anybody else have any comments, any questions? Paul, uh, what about you? Do you have any comments?
I was investigating what you're talking about when it comes
Great.
to breathing, and you're right. Like when the mind is in a wholesome state, it's all good. The breath can be in the background, but say an unwholesome thought creeps in, and there is some tension in the chest area or a fear that comes up, then it's good to take the wheel of the breath to come back to a more balanced state, and then it can go more relaxed after that. I had a question, perhaps, from the earlier part of the talk, where you mentioned or was investigating the body boundaries within the mind, and there is this awareness that moves between those, say, sensations that create those boundaries in the mind. It almost feels like that awareness also can be broadened, perhaps, because it seems like the awareness is just a thought going from one, say, sensation to another sensation. I was wondering
Sorry,
if
can
you
you
could,
repeat
if
that
you,
that last part? You said
yeah,
awareness can be.
it almost feels like awareness is just a thought moving from one sensation to another when it comes to, say, the bodily boundary sensations.
That
So is it
yeah,
the, yeah, please.
that is true. Yeah, so the body, the boundaries of the body are a perception that we have. And there's the jhana of the boundless consciousness. I think it's that one, where basically you start to realize that is like a perception you keep in mind, that the body begins somewhere and then ends, and then the outside also starts somewhere, and that is something that you can then let go of. And then and then there's just like one continuous stream of consciousness. And consciousness is indeed, is that which knows, that's what pays attention. So sometimes there can be like the consciousness that is just taking in everything that's happening. And this is not in the suttas or anything, but this is what I read in a book by Buddhadasa, where he calls that a binding moment of awareness, where basically the mind takes in um, everything from the senses, and then it combines that and is aware of that. So that is when you have like a more general sense of awareness. So that is one thing you can be aware of. But then we also have like these individual moments of consciousness, and how Dhammarato has described that as being kind of like a computer that can only process one thing at a time. Where, for example, you will be aware of a bodily sensation, and then immediately the next moment you are aware of a perception, and then immediately the moment after that of a thought, and then the moment after that you maybe take all the information from the last few moments and kind of mix that together as more of like a general awareness. And so, so about the body or the boundary of the body. Yeah, this is something you can really, play around with. So for example, as I just described, when you feel, the breath coming in and filling up the whole body, then you can play around with that boundary by keeping an idea in mind that you're breathing out through the skin. Or you can even, and this takes quite a lot of this guy it takes quite a strong practice. But if you do it only, breathing throughout the skin, then and you probably would be only able to do it for a short amount of time in the beginning, then then it kind of starts to dissolve, the boundary between what's outside and what's inside. And a lot of teachers, will talk about having that sense of spaciousness when our mind is really unified, that we are kind of like aware of what's going on around us. And I believe that's Dhammarato describes that as kind of like being an antenna. So that's also something you want to develop gradually.
Okay.
And what's good to mention here, and I remember this, from my own practice, is that when I realized like, oh wow, this being really aware, of the body, of like the entire body, being aware of what's going on around me, that seemed to be what like got my mind really unified. But so one of the dangers can be that we start to become so so focused on the body that we start to become really tense. So it's really about having a good balance between awareness of the body and radiance of the mind. And radiance of the mind is kind of like a synonym for gladness of the mind, basically. So there's a whole sutta that goes into this. I think it's 126 or 128 in the Majjhima Nikaya. And the sutta is called Imperfections. And there the Buddha actually describes, going through this process himself where he was like really focused on the mind, and he would get like a really clean mind, and then his mind would be very radiant or very glad, but he had no awareness or very little awareness of the body, and because of that he could not stay unified very long. So then he was like, okay, what if I really focus on the body? So then he describes like being very aware of the body, fully aware of the body, but not having any radiance of mind or not having any gladness. Because by focusing so much on the body, you start to become very, either very tense or very strained, like that. And that's also, if you look at like Mahasi, for example, they tend to do very actively that noting, with the body, like sitting, touching, feeling, this and that. But they don't have that gladness. And then when you look on the other side, if we're looking at like concentration practice, where we're actually looking at the tip of the nose, then we have that full radiance, but we have no awareness of the body. So the middle path, that Dhammarato has described, is really about having both the awareness of the body, having that sense of spaciousness around the body, and also having that gladness. And that is what the Buddha found out, that you have to have both these qualities to, to come to that stage where we can be really aware of the body, really be aware of the boundary of the body, sensitive to the whole body, and also being happy at the same time. So that is what takes, that's what takes real practice. And the Buddha also describes having like limited gladness and limited awareness of the body. And that is where then our wisdom, our discernment, and asking the right questions comes in, where we kind of have to fine tune, like, okay, I'm paying attention to the body and I'm paying attention to the mind, but my mind is not, my mind is still a crowd. So what is it that is, keeping the balloon down? If we can kind of see it as a hot air balloon, what's weighing it down? Or how can I put more hot air into this balloon? Which is a nice idea to keep in mind, by the way. Kind of on a side note, imagining your body filling up with hot air, and then on the in breath, and then on the out breath, you leave all the cold air underneath you, as the hot air helps you lift up. And that kind of almost can make you feel like you're kind of floating. But so this is how we train, with that boundary of the body. So it's something we really have to settle in to gradually. If we try to do it right away, then it's going to be difficult. So does
Thank
that
you.
answer your question?
Yes, thank you. A lot of aspects to play around with. Will do.
Right. So Ivan, what did you think? Any comments? Any questions?
Is it me?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yes. When you said limited happiness, I found that interesting. So as opposed to giving ourselves some high standard, limited happiness seems to be the appropriate wise attention.
So you can kind of think it in this way. This is how the Buddha describes it, is that while we are, practicing the gladdening of the mind, or, just anapanasati in general, at first, we just, we put in the effort, and then our mind starts to get unified. So the Buddha noticed that as he was, practicing anapanasati over and over again, his mind started to get unified. But as it started getting unified, he ran into several subtle kilesas, subtle defilements, that caused him to lose his unification of mind. So basically, the first thing we have to do is learn to get our mind unified, kind of like getting the fire going, creating that spark over and over again. to get that gladness. And then eventually it kind of starts to stick. So the way Dhammarato talks about that is that in the beginning, we don't really have the attitude, but we just keep changing the minds one after another, after another thought. And so that's, creating that spark over and over again, and learning how to have like a very small fire and keeping it safe so that it doesn't immediately blow out. And then when we have a fire going, then we need to learn how to keep it going. So how to maintain it, because it's only if we maintain it, which is, kind of that limited gladness, then when we stay in that state of being a winner, then when we feel like a winner, maybe our feelings are not necessarily entirely happy, but when we keep being a winner, then we start to really feel happy as well. So when we are a winner, we have to learn what kind of things can pull us out of that state. And there was a talk, on the Sangha. I think it was like 3 or 2 months ago, where I talked about this sutta. So he kind of went into detail about the sutta, about the various things the Buddha described that pulled him out of his unification of mind. And one of them would be, for example, what was it again? Longing. That's a very good one to actually talk about. Very relevant for what we talked about today. Is that the Buddha said that when he got his mind unified and he was happy, then he was like, "Oh, I'm happy, but it's not good enough." So that would be kind of like, "Oh, yeah, I have limited gladness, but I want more." So we have to see that, we have to catch that, and then make a change to it, to keep that winner's attitude going, to keep that fire going so that it can steadily grow. And Bhikkhu Bodhi has a note on that, and I'm not sure where he quoted it from. I couldn't find a source for it, so take it with a grain of salt, but it makes sense to me. Where the Buddha describes that, he said that if I keep the same perception in mind, then longing arose in me. So basically what he's saying is that if he keeps doing the same thing over and over again, then he starts getting bored. So what he's really emphasizing there is that we have to keep looking like, am I still having this playful attitude, or is it starting to become a ritual? So when you are doing, like, for example, the whole body breathing with the balloon, you have to really be aware, of your mind. Like, are you really still interested? Are you still entertained with this whole body breathing? Or is it actually time to start playing with something else? Maybe going back to the following the breathing. And in that way, you keep it fresh. Especially, with, chasing the breathing, having that sense of movement where you're actively like keeping track of something, that can be really entertaining. And then when you've done that for a while, like, oh, let me do the whole body again. So you just keep, playing around with it. And as long as it feels entertaining, as long as it feels fresh, then you can still stay and you can still keep doing that. And, at some point you might emphasize more, the ideas that you have in mind with the breathing, and maybe less so on the gladdening of the mind, with the thoughts. And we want to do both aspects, basically all the time, but at one point we're gonna emphasize one thing more over the other. So sometimes, like, maybe you don't even wanna do anything special with the breathing. You just want to chase the breathing, but then you're really paying attention to what's going on in the mind. And this is also something that I think is important to pay attention to, that sometimes you will notice that the mind is actually quite pure, but the body is still a bit restless. So when you notice that, then you can see that you can actually kind of put the gladdening of the mind at a low pace, and then you start to pay really attention to the body to really settle the body. But other times, the body will already be very comfortable, very at ease. But the mind, there's something in the mind that keeps agitating it. And then you want to pay really a lot of attention to what's going on in the mind. And that is really also, what sati is all about. Is on the one hand, it's about waking up. But on the other hand, it's also about keeping something in mind. So what I really like to do with my practice is that basically when there's nothing special going on, then the theme I have in mind for my practice is just the breathing, just the breath energy. And I'm still doing like all the items of anapanasati that are necessary. It's just kind of like regular practice, like you're having one wholesome thought after another. Yeah, you're just doing like the practice as you've learned it. But when you notice there's like a very specific thing that you have to pay attention to, that's really like pulling you out of that unification of mind and making you into a crowd, then you want to make that into your team. For example, when you're having like a lot of aversion, a lot of hatred come up, then you can keep metta or goodwill as a kind of team. So that doesn't mean you're going to wish everybody to be happy. But what I like to do is, if I, for example, have some hatred against a person, then or self-criticism, then I'm going to keep that team in mind. Like, okay, then I'm continuously kind of aware whenever I can remember it. I'm not going to hate on anything that's going to come up or anything right now. I'm not going to hate on anything. I'm absolutely resolute that I'm going to abandon it as soon as it comes up. I'm watching for it and I'm not going to entertain it. And that's how you get back into that unification of mind. So Dhammarato also has a team in mind right now, I think. Or are you not talking to me? I'll just mute Dhammarato for the moment. I don't think he was talking to us. So I highly encourage everybody, that when you are practicing, can you notice what the number one thing is that you have to develop or abandon at this moment? So what it is you have to abandon and what it is you need to develop in order to abandon that. Because that's also really going to train your discernment. It's really going to train your wisdom. Because then instead of just, having like one wholesome thought after another, which is like the base of the practice, of course, you're also learning to become aware of the qualities in the mind that keep you with the loser's attitude. So that's how your own creativity and your own wisdom can really grow. It's what I found very helpful. And other themes you can have would be, when you're when you're feeling lazy or unmotivated, then you can keep, for example, success as a team. That you're over and over again, you're gonna encourage yourself. I can do it. Let's go. Let's do this. Let's change the mind. Kind of like imagine a stadium full of people cheering your name. For me, Daniel, Daniel, Daniel. Oh. Then I imagine myself scoring a goal and then taking a deep breath. That's it. We got it. I got that one from Dhammarato, I think, or maybe someone else. So yeah, so keeping a team in mind is really useful as well. And yeah, what's generally like very useful to keep in mind is that when the Buddha describes, basically in all suttas, is he always had three qualities in mind, and that is to have sati, to be alert, both in terms of waking up and keeping something in mind. And then the second one is to be ardent, which means that, yeah, you're really, on top of it, to abandon what needs to be abandoned and to develop what needs to be developed. So really having that sense of like, okay, I'm going to do this. It's worth doing. I'm going to do it right now. And then the third one is to be resolute, which basically means that you're not going to entertain anything unskillful. Like there's this tendency that we have that when we have certain defilements, for example, we're thinking about, oh, what kind of food am I going to have like tomorrow morning or for dinner or whatever like that. And then we think like, yeah, this defilement, I kind of like this defilement. Like I'll leave this one running around in my head for a while. Yeah, it causes a little bit of damage, but no, whatever. And so to be resolute is that, yeah, we're not going to entertain anything that we know is unskillful. So we've been going for about an hour and 20 minutes. So does anybody have any any questions, any remarks, final remarks?
Yeah, I have a question.
Mhm.
So with mindfulness of the body, sometimes like that makes me think of sometimes I will feel like my body will feel restless, or I'll feel some discomfort, and I'll just try and have like wholesome thoughts and gladden the mind. But then I realized, like, hold on, I just needed to drink a bit of water or go to the bathroom, and then like all of that is gone. So yeah, but I wanted to like ask you, since you're a monk and you don't eat after noon, right? That's the
Mhm.
like how do you deal with that if you're like hungry afternoon? Do you guys just gladden the mind, like, or maybe drink water? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question, actually. So we are allowed to eat sunflower seeds. That's something you can eat at any time. And this is basically, the Buddha allowed that to deal with feelings of hunger. And yeah, basically because they don't really taste like much for me anyway. So that is allowed, and he does allow some kind of juice and sugar, if that is something you would want to do. But for me, like most of the time, I eat one meal a day. Like sometimes I will have like lunch like before 12 as well. But yeah, actually, I just kind of learned to do like probably like 5 days a week. I will eat like just in one sitting, and yeah, you really get used to it. Like in the beginning, I would definitely get hungry, but you very soon you learn like, yeah, it's just like a habit, you know, of eating something in the afternoon. And it's just like you start thinking about food, like, oh, I haven't eaten in a while. Maybe I should start to be hungry. And you know, that's kind of how those defilements work. And but if you don't eat in the afternoon and you never do it, like even in the morning, you know, when I wake up, I haven't eaten in nearly 24 hours, then yeah, I still don't have any hunger at all. So yeah, you really do get used to it. And but let's say I would be in a situation where I am hungry, then the Buddha says that those feelings should be endured happily. So yeah, basically you change your attitude about it. Like, I'm the boss here. I'm the boss over my own feelings. I can handle this. It's just a little bit. It's not that big of a monster. And you know, the great forest ajahns, as they call them, you know, like Ajahn Mun, Longtama Boa, you know, the famous monks of Thailand, they would actually, interestingly, really emphasize, you know, dealing with bodily discomfort as a way to get great insight into how the mind works. And that's something I found very interesting myself, and I played around with. That when you, you know, for myself, like 2 weeks ago, I was, you know, in the mountains, and I had like, my stomach was hurting a lot. And I was like, oh, I don't like this. And I was like, okay, I'm just gonna lay on bed and, you know, whatever, I'll just kind of lay in bed and try to gladden mind. And then I woke up to it. I was like, oh no, this is not how I deal with that. So I started investigating the body, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna really, you know, sense where in the body do I feel like the nausea? Where do I feel the ache? And then when I felt like I could pinpoint it, then I started like breathing around it, feeling the breath flow around it, like as in a river, you know, with the rock. And then eventually, because I kept doing that, the sensation was kind of cut off from the rest of the body. That's what it felt like. And then when I could see that, then I noticed that what I had created in my mind out of this bodily sensation was much bigger than what the sensation itself was. And then, you know, that really, you know, caused me to, yeah, you know, let go, you know, quite a bit, let my mind become really calm, because I realized that all of this stuff, like I was making it up myself. And so investigating the body and seeing what is the sensation and what is the layer you have put on top of that is one of the best ways you get insight into how the mind works. So if you do get hungry, I encourage you, or if you have any bodily sensations, yeah, really investigate that. Like, what have I made up about it, and what is the actual sensation? And this is also where the elements come in very handy. Like, try or practice seeing it in terms of like the earth element, fire element, air element, water element. Because when you do that, then you are not identified with it anymore. Then, yeah, then you are seeing it as just natural things, and that can help break through those attitudes you hold about it. So, yeah, that's what I would say about that.
Yeah,
And
thank you.
Sure. So, yeah, we've been going on an hour and a half. Mikey, I don't know if you still do the closing remarks, but I'll just let you take it away as a tradition.
Happily. Yes.
Great.
Thanks so much, Phra Daniel, for being here today. This was really a splendid talk and nice to have you on. In fact, we'd love you to come back, give us another talk sometime soon. That would be really nice. And thanks, friends, for being here as well. You're welcome to stay, talk about the Noble Buddha Dhamma, share something on the practice. Perhaps there's a lingering question or two. That's okay. And if you're watching this on YouTube, come join us here on the Dhamma Friends Discord, where we hang out in the Hangout Voice channel. And you all are welcome to hang out here anytime, day or night. We've got seasoned practitioners all over the world that you can talk about the Noble Dhamma with. Also, we invite you
Thanks, Mikey.
we invite you to leave a comment on the video, like it, share it with someone, and check out opensanghafoundation.org, where we've got things like Sangha Map, talks by Ajahn Dhammavidu, books by Bhikkhu Buddhadasa, and you can also find these talks on iTunes and Spotify as well. Yeah, remember, take care and take it easy. Don't worry, be happy. Thanks, friends.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
See you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Daniel. Awesome talk.